I would now like to introduce Larry Mason, CEO of Earthwatch, for a few opening remarks about today's webinar.
Thanks, Kat. I'm delighted to welcome our many friends and supporters to today's webinar. While Earthwatch has been operating across the globe for nearly 45 years, our mission has never been more relevant than it is today. The global rhino crisis is a tragic example of today's urgent call to action because poaching has decimated rhino populations around the world. Our work will help protect this iconic species by connecting Earthwatch scientists with volunteers in the field to conduct the critical research support that's needed to help protect the rhino. We've enjoyed our long partnership with Dawn and her team, and we're thrilled to continue our collaboration with this new rhino study in South Africa. So without further delay, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Dawn Scott.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you to everyone for joining this webinar today. To promote World Rhino Day and to raise the awareness of the current critical situation of rhinos in South Africa, I'd like to talk about our new Earthwatch project, Conserving Endangered Rhinos in South Africa. Next slide. My own personal research interests are in mammal behaviour, ecology and conservation, and more specifically, why humans and wildlife come into conflict. I've been visiting the field site in South Africa for nearly 20 years now, and with Lynn and her dad Dougal, we've been developing research which hopefully informs and directs conservation and management of African mammals. This includes, for the last 9 years, running the Earthwatch project on scavengers with Lynn and her dad. Lynn has been on the site for a very long time now, and she's been monitoring the rhinos, and they've all been named and recorded for a very long time. Next slide. The site in South Africa is very special to me. I even got married there, and it was where I saw my very first rhino. And this is the rhino. He's a male bull called Patrol. And myself and Patrol have shared a lot of experiences together in the African bush when we've been doing research. Sometimes a little bit scary, but obviously very amazing experiences with him. Next slide. Unfortunately, last year, the growing crisis in South Africa, the animals being poached, hit home. And on the field site, we lost 4 of our rhinos, including Patrol and also Winnie and Cheeky Cow, which were both females, one with a calf called Charlie and one which was pregnant. This hit us all very, very hard, especially Lynn, as you can see in this photo. Next slide. Because of our losses of these animals, it made us realise that the urgency to switch our research to help conserve them and try and protect the few animals that we had left. Next slide. What was exceptionally painful about losing rhinos is the brutal, horrific and inhumane way in which they are killed. These beautiful and gentle creatures of the bush are slaughtered in such a brutal way. It is like losing family members, and it is very heart-rending. We really, really needed to shift our priorities and switch our research direction to put all our effort into try and protect the animals that we've got left. Next slide. To help you understand the situation in South Africa, this figure shows the exponential growth in the number of rhinos that are killed every year. On average, 5 rhinos die a day, but there are other animals that are left which haven't been killed but are orphaned, and that also then die. In the last 7 years, 20% of the rhino population has been lost, and in this year alone, 800 have been killed. This exponential growth rate has been modelled, and currently it is predicted that if we don't do anything, rhinos will be extinct in the next 20 years. Next slide. There are 2 species of rhino, and of each there's subspecies. There's estimated combined of the white and the black rhino to be around about 25,000. So you can see how the numbers that are being poached is having an impact on this population. Next slide. "75% of the world's rhino populations are actually found in South Africa, and this is predominantly white rhinos. Many of these are in protected areas. However, 24% are actually privately owned in private lands, and these private lands provide very little, have very little government support to help protect the rhinos. So it is really crucial that we work with the Private Rhino Owners Association to be able to help them, to give them the tools to help protect their animals." Next slide. You can see from this figure that the population now has passed its tipping point. There is more deaths than births in the rhino population, and so these species are now on the road to extinction if we don't do anything. Next slide. So why are rhinos killed? Why is it grown in the number that's been killed every year? The number of rhinos killed is correlated with the economic growth in Vietnam and China. As more people have more money to be able to spend, there is a growing elite, and these elite want specialist products. Rhino horn has traditionally been used as a medicine, although research has shown it has virtually no medical properties. But even without, with the medical growth, with the medical demands, it is now being switched towards new uses. And so the growing elite use it as a status symbol. To have rhino and to use rhino in social occasions shows that you have money. And that's what's really pushing the demand up, even though the traditional medicine uses are still in play, although they don't work, there is still that growth. On the black market, rhino horn is worth twice as gold. So it is targeted by crime syndicates because it makes a huge amount of profit. Next slide. As I said, rhino horn has been shown to have virtually no medical properties. It is actually made of keratin, which is similar to horses' hooves, turtle beaks, cockatoo bills, and fingernails. So it has similar medical properties of biting your fingernails. Next slide. There's lots of different ways that we can deal with this crisis. Looking at different ways of management of the animals, including dehorning the rhinos to prevent them being targeted by poachers, looking at changes in policy, government policy, and also fines and prosecutions, and reviewing the legal trade in rhino horn, and also trying to raise awareness and reduce the demand in the countries that are driving it. Next slide. On the field site in South Africa, we have increased our anti-poaching patrols to protect the animals that are left. This is hugely expensive to run and maintain these patrols, but it's one of the ways that we need to put in place to help protect the animals that are left. Next slide. In response to the animals that died last year, the field site has now dehorned all their rhinos. It costs about $1,000 to dehorn a rhino, and this needs to be done every 2 years. Research has shown that it increases the survival rate by about 30%. Next slide. However, one of the problems with dehorning the rhinos is we don't know what the consequences are of dehorning on the behaviour. Rhinos use their horn for lots of different functions, including protecting their calves. So is the dehorning going to actually increase calf mortality or cause more stress on these animals? Next slide. Male rhinos use their horns in territorial disputes, and it has an influence on their social hierarchy. So removal of the horn may also affect social systems, and maybe even breeding. Next slide. The horns are also used as a tool, so they use them for digging and debarking trees. So it might actually impact their ability to secure food or water, and they also use it in the form of communication. Next slide. Along with trying to find out what the impact of the dehorning has on the animal's behaviour, we also want to find out what the loss of rhinos will have on ecosystems in future. They're a crucial part of the ecosystem. They are a keystone species. They create lawns and they support a range of diversity, including avian diversity, as you can see in this photo. Next slide. They also support invertebrate biodiversity, such as dung beetles. Next slide. And also support other mammals by creating grazing lawns and reducing the chance of burning. Next slide. Our project, as well as trying to raise awareness about the situation in South Africa and the number of animals that are dying, we're also trying to address these scientific questions and protect the rhinos at the same time. Next slide. Earthwatch has very, very kindly heard our cry of need and help and has helped to develop this project with us. There's a very short period of time from when we raised this issue last year in November to getting a project up and funding underwritten to support it. And in October this year, we'll be running our first rhino project with Earthwatch in South Africa. Next slide. Volunteers who come on the project will be crucial in helping monitoring these species. They'll be observing the behaviour and looking at how the behaviour is affected with rhinos that are horned and dehorned. Next slide. Along with the observations of the behaviour, we'll also be setting up a remote system to look at how they use the horn and how this behaviour has changed, or whether they've shifted to use different habitats as a response to changes in management. Next slide. They'll also be looking at assessing the biodiversity they support. So here are some volunteers that are looking at rhino dung and the dung beetles that are uniquely associated with these mega herbivores. Next slide. Volunteers will be working on the forefront of where this crisis is happening, but they're not part of the anti-poaching team. We have a separate dedicated team that helps protect the rhinos and responds to any concerns to allow the scientists to do their research whilst we all work together to try and help protect these species. Next slide. We urgently need your help. We urgently need to respond to this. It would be such a shame that these animals will become extinct, brutally massacred in front of our eyes if we don't do anything. Next slide. Help us to protect these amazing and beautiful creatures before it is too late. Thank you so much for listening today. You can find out more information about our project on a special report in the Earthwatch web pages, and I'm now happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dawn. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So, Dawn, our first question is, how does studying rhino behavior help to conserve the species and protect rhinos from poaching?
First of all, we're looking at a form of management that's been implemented. We're looking at how dehorning is affecting their behaviour, whether it changes their movement to different habitats, which might increase the risk for poaching. Also, dehorning is one of the ways that private landowners may be able to protect their rhinos. But if the rhino's behaviour has long-term consequences on their social structure or breeding or increases the risk, then they need to consider that when they do the management. So we're hoping that this information will give people the tools to be able to know the consequences and be able to mitigate against those consequences if that's the type of management they are going to implement.
Our next question is a three-part question. What does dehorning entail, and are the animals medicated or are they in pain during the procedure? Is dehorning young rhinos different from older ones?
So dehorning requires the animals to be sedated, and this is usually done from a helicopter. Once they're sedated, what will happen is the eyes will be covered and the animal's horn will be removed. They leave about a small amount of the horn. The horn is similar, as I said, to fingernails, and so it's a bit like cutting your nails. The animal is, because it's sedated, it means that it's a minimal amount of stress on that animal. There's always a potential risk during anesthesia and sedation for the animals, but by doing it under sedation, it protects the animals, it reduces the stress, and obviously protects the people as well. They're not in any pain. It doesn't go down into any nerves or roots or anything like that. And the horn regrows about 6 centimeters a year, so it has to be done every 2 years. Young rhino don't have a large horn base, so it takes several years before that horn base starts to grow and establish. So it's not different from rhinos, young rhinos. We wouldn't actually target any of the calves until they were old enough to be able to go under the same procedure. Is that okay? Next question.
Okay, next question is, how useful to your research is the data volunteers will be collecting, and how important is the donation volunteers make to your project?
So the data the volunteers will be collecting, everything we do with the volunteers is essential information. The behaviour data, it requires a lot of observation. It requires lots of time in the field and people to constantly be there recording that information. So we can't do that without volunteers. We can't do that without people watching the rhinos. So that information is essential for us. The donations, people, everybody in country, any money that we can get onto the site to help protect the rhinos goes towards that monitoring, help support Lynn and her dad to manage and maintain those anti-poaching patrols as well. Anybody in country is observation, is making sure that it's deterring poachers from coming on site.
Okay, approximately how many rhinos are in the research area currently?
So currently we have 14 rhinos that we are monitoring in one site, and then we also work with multiple other sites with private landowners and also with the national park. So to compare between the different populations to make the data robust and valid, we need to study multiple different populations. Obviously that's at the current time, and hopefully we would like to keep that as long as possible, those animals.
We have heard about poisoning the horn or putting a GPS somehow in the horn. Are these viable ways of reducing poaching and or prosecuting poachers?
So yeah, there's lots of different things that are coming up which might help deter people taking the horn. I'll address poisoning first. So poisoning, it was suggested that poisoning could happen because it was thought that there was, the horn had sort of holes inside it, so that the poison would go and stay within the horn. Unfortunately, the poison doesn't stay with the horn that long. There are ethical considerations around poisoning, and the people that are actually killing the rhinos to then sell the horn and pass it on, there's several steps in that chain. So whether they actually care whether that horn is poisoned and whether that would deter them from taking that horn has not been proven yet. GPS as well, there is a method of actually putting a GPS tag inside the horn and also connecting it to a device so that if the horn is removed away from the rhino itself, that it would trigger a sensor. Now, that type of technology will help with prosecution and hopefully finding the horn and leading to stopping people poaching in the long term, but it doesn't stop that animal being killed in the first place. So there's different types of approaches that are happening at the moment. There's no silver bullet. there's lots and lots of different approaches, and actually we need to try to put the different things in place is going to come up with a long-term solution.
How effective is marking rhino horns as a conservation solution?
So marking the rhino horn is similar to the GPS. You're looking at tracing it and finding out where it goes in terms of the market, and trying to target those criminal syndicates in terms of prosecution. So similar with the poisoning, similar with the GPS, this is looking at trying to target the groups that are doing it.
Is dehorning taking place on wildlife preserves where lions are present?
At the moment, there is no dehorning that's been taking place in the national parks. Dehorning rhinos could have an effect on their tourism value as well, but it is suggested that it might be a last resort if there is huge poaching pressure. There's been a study done on black rhinos, dehorning black rhinos, where predators were present, specifically hyenas. And it is suggested from that data that the calves may have had a slightly higher mortality with the predators as a result of dehorning. But it's not been studied in white rhinos, and we don't know what the full consequences are. But at the moment, it is not encouraged within areas where there are predators.
Has prosecution of poachers actually happened?
Yes, prosecution of poachers has happened and is increasing, and the law has changed in South Africa in the last few years to make sure that the cases go to prosecution, and there's also been an increase in the amount of fines, and also the sentences these poachers are potentially liable for if they get prosecuted. So the law is getting stronger, and prosecutions are occurring at the moment.
Okay. How will the airline ban of carrying rhino horn derivatives and other poached items affect the pledge of the rhinos?
As I said, there's lots of different approaches, and I think any approach will help a little bit, but it needs to be a broad, multiple stranded approach to resolve the issue. We have to stop the demand. The demand is a long-term aim, and in the meantime, we have to protect the animals and try and reduce the risk of them dying before the long-term solution comes into place.
As the human population is exploding in South Africa, isn't extinction inevitable?
Unfortunately, across the globe, human populations are increasing, and our demand for resources does have an impact on wildlife and natural resources. However, I believe we are very intelligent and very resourceful species, and we have got the ability to be able to live with wildlife and sustainably manage our natural resources. And I think that's where we need to work to find solutions. We can do it, but we need to put that effort in to come up with those ideas and implement sustainable solutions.
Do poachers who poach from helicopters see that the rhino is dehorned? Have you found a dehorned rhino poached because the poacher did not realize the rhino didn't have a horn?
There's been different studies on the actual impact of dehorning on poaching, and as I showed in my slide, one study says there's a 30% decline in poaching risk as a result of dehorning. In one study where they dehorned, they still had poaching occur, and it was suggested that it was a retaliation. They killed the animals out of frustration. Or also that the base of the horn that is left behind still has enough value for them to kill the rhino and get some profit. In other areas where studies have been explored, have been implemented to explore dehorning, there's been a reduction. So out of 30 animals that were killed or poached, only one of them was actually dehorned. So you the poacher can actually see, the people in the helicopter can see that the animal has been dehorned, but the decision to target that animal may not be necessarily an economic value. There might be other things coming into play. We are hoping that if the resource isn't there, then that will deter them targeting reserves where the animals have been dehorned. They're more likely to go to other places than the animals the areas that are dehorned.
Will volunteers on this expedition spend the majority of their time monitoring rhino behavior, or is it a healthy balance between vegetation surveys, rhino dung analysis, and avian surveys?
Okay. So we've got lots and lots of different things to do in terms of our objectives, and each one will vary seasonally. So when we do the vegetation, that tends to be in the spring in South Africa, obviously because it's easier to identify plant species when it's seeding and flowering. Avian communities we can study all year round, but more specifically in the spring where we get the grazing lawns, that's a better indicator of where the birds are. So throughout the year, and all the different teams, we'll be doing a suite of different types of research activities, and each one will vary depending on the seasonal demands. But all teams will obviously be involved in monitoring, recording the behaviour, and also doing some biodiversity assessments.
What happens to the orphaned rhino? Is there a facility similar to Daphne Sheldrick's elephant orphanage?
There are places now that are taking orphaned rhinos. We had an orphaned rhino, which was Charlie, with us for a while, and unfortunately they didn't survive more than 6 months. And even though they're there and you're trying to support them as best you can in terms of feeding, depending on the age, they can actually start to lose condition without their mother's support. So there are facilities for rhino, orphan rhino, and we are one of the sites that has got the capacity to do that. But there are other centres that do that as well. So there's lots of people that are trying to set this up and support these. Their survivorship is quite low, depending on their age.
What do you intend to do with the data collected from observations made on Earthwatch expeditions?
Okay, so the data, we have specific hypotheses that we would like to answer, and those hypotheses and those questions have been put to us by stakeholders, specifically the Private Rhino Owners Association, that really need this information. So we are using the data as any scientist to hopefully publish, but in the short term we want to write reports to help inform South African national parks, the Wildlife Ranching Association, the Private Rhinos Association, and also to the DEA, which is the Department of Environmental Affairs, who are looking at the rhino issues across South Africa, and also looking at the review of legalization of rhino horn as well.
Who are the key decision makers in South Africa that you seek to inform, and are they or have they been receptive to this information and interested in putting poaching to a halt?
So I've answered some of that in the previous question. So obviously the Department of Environmental Affairs in South Africa is one of the policymakers. And yes, they have rhinos very highly on their agenda. And so any information that helps inform their decisions and changes in policy is useful. As I said, a lot of the questions that we are trying to address are questions that have come from the people that own the rhinos and need to know what to do with them for the best of the rhinos. So we are working very closely with stakeholders, and the information will be passed back to stakeholders to help inform that management.
Okay, Dr. Scott, this is our last question. What is the best way to raise awareness about this issue? How do you educate local communities on the importance of rhino conservation?
We work very closely with communities we have in all our projects. I think we need to target lots and lots of different groups. It's not just the local communities, it's national and international as well. We need to make sure that people are aware of their natural heritage, and that heritage is being lost, and how they can be empowered to help support and protect that. Just as the crime syndicates have networks of people, we need networks of people as well to make sure that any information, any sort of risks are transmitted back to the people that can then help and respond to that. But also we need to make sure that rhinos, they are such a cultural significance that is not lost by people coming in and taking away that natural heritage. So we're hoping to communicate, go into communities and schools. We work very closely with school groups to try and help and support them to, protect their natural heritage in the long run.
Okay, and the last thing I think I should read says, thank you so much for caring about these gentle, giant, beautiful creatures. Thank you, Dr. Scott. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, World Rhino Day with Dr. Dawn Scott. If you have any other questions, please contact Earthwatch by emailing them at communications@earthwatch.org.